All right, Acts 22. Acts 22. All right. Where do we get our doctrine from?
Epistles. Paul's epistles.
The epistles. Where does most false doctrine come from?
Transition books.
Okay, Acts. Pardon? Anything but the epistles. Most false doctrine comes from that. A lot comes out of the Gospels and the book of Acts, but our doctrine generally comes out of the epistles. Now we say that to remind you of that. And I can only honestly say I only heard that from one Baptist preacher that I can think of. But I haven't been under a lot of Baptist preachers, just 3 or 4. From only one. Has anybody ever heard that? No? Or yes? Or you don't remember? You've heard so much you don't even know. After a while, you don't know who you are after a while, right? You hear so much.
You forget to remember.
You forget to remember. Okay, let's get to Acts 22. I mean, as you read this stuff, it is the Acts of the Apostles, so it's this ongoing saga, ongoing story, and we could say, well, what is there to learn from it? And it's pretty well self-explanatory, which really is true. Most all this is self-explanatory. It contains, Father, bless our lesson today, that it would be fruitful, Father, that we would learn something about your word today and about our Lord. In Christ's name, amen. 30 verses. I mean, we begin these things the way we always do. Chapter 22, it contains 30 verses. There will be no paragraph markings because that ended a couple chapters ago. In the King James Bible, there's no paragraph markings from here on out. And I went ahead and made an outline that we'll stick to in the presentation of this book. It begins in verses 1 through 21. Paul is given the opportunity he's given the license, and that's the only place that appears in verse previous, in verse 40 of Acts 21. He was given license. I think we ended last week. Who went to jail because he had no license to preach? I want to say Paul Bunyan. John Bunyan.
His brother John.
His brother John.
Paul Bunyan's the guy with the axe.
By the way, is Paul Bunyan in the Bible? Is that in the Bible? There's a verse about that. And it's in Psalms, I believe. And it's the one that he had a reputation for cutting down the giant trees, thick trees. There is there's a little bit of, to all these legends, it's kind of like Greek mythology, to all this stuff, there's probably an element of truth to that. There is a verse about it. We bring it up. I think when we do some bizarre stuff, when you look at Devil's Tower, it looks like it's the stump of a tree. The way it is, the rocks are divided up. It looks like petrified wood. And if you go out in the woods and you see rotten wood, it always kind of diamonds up that way in these long slats and all. And there's all kinds of formations like that worldwide. And then down south of the border, what do they call that? Those tabletops that look like stumps. It's a mesa. And what does mesa mean? Table. Looks like a tabletop. Like it was a giant tree. I mean, there could be some truth to that. We weren't around then, right? All right. So anyway, Paul gets up on the steps of the castle, and he begins his address. Now, in verse 1, if you're going to make an outline and you have to pick a word, what would you pick? I mean, not to say that is where we're going. And then we're going to do the same thing tonight. Sometimes they give you the opportunity to guess the letter. What's the first word? Paul's what? Paul's defense. So we're going to use all what kind of words? A? Exactly. All A word. Yeah, all D words. Paul's defense. So verses 1 through 21 is Paul's defense. It runs through, it ends, he preaches all the way up to depart. He said unto me, depart, for I will send thee far hence unto the Gentiles. That's where Paul's defense ends. And then in verses 22, 23, now this kind of runs almost by the verse. Then they gave him audience unto this word, and then lifted up their voices. I mean, they were against him. So Paul's denouncers, those that denounce what he says, is verses 22 and 23. Then the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle. So they go and get Paul. The chief captain does that. Well, he's already there. But he's going to bring him into the castle. He's going to lock him up. And so Paul's detention. Anybody here ever have detention? Mrs. Tucker, did you ever have detention in school? Really? But did you? You had it? Did you have one?
Yes.
Burst my bubble.
Chewing bubble gum?
No, burst my bubble. Was it detention?
Yeah, I know. I don't really.
I can't imagine it.
I can't either. That's it. We're out of here. Yes. You had one? One detention? We had a study hall that had detention. The whole study hall. The teacher came out. He was teaching it was the cafeteria where there was another room. I think it was for the teachers' room for dinner and for lunch. And they were having, I don't know what class it was. It was, what do you learn about politics at Washington?
Government?
Could have been a government class. And we had a study hall, man. It was filled with animals, man. Our study hall. We were mixed in there with the casual fools. I mean, there were some real jerks in the school, man. These kids are disturbed, man. And this kid that had this problem, where this resulted with, he wasn't the cause of the problem. And the study hall was just going nuts. And the study hall teacher could not control the class, could not control it. I mean, they had some, these people needed to go to First Manual High, man. My uncle went there, Manual High. Every city must have one. You know, that Blackboard Jungle, they go to, it's called North Manual High or something. It's actually called Manual High. I know it's a Hollywood set. But it's where they can't control the kids. My uncle went there because they had to slap them around to control these people. Anyway, the teacher came out. He was a big guy. He said, this whole class has got detention. And he just overrode whoever was in charge of the study hall. And the power went on.
You did? Well, you kidding?
I know. Would I kid about that? Anyway. He gave the whole place detention, and I said, "Whoa, this ain't good." I had to go to work, but I wasn't about to get up. This kid got up, and he said, "I think I told you the story before. I got to go to work. I can't be late. I got to go to work." Now, for some kids, maybe they couldn't lose their job. You never know. They had to support their mother. Who knows? Mm-hmm. You don't know about their private life. Man, him and that teacher, it was knock down, drag out. For all it was worth. I mean, it wasn't tag team time. They went at it. It was a fist fight. Teacher won. I mean, it was body slams and everything. There were kids that were about to make a move to leave, and that's when the knockdown drag out happened. Everybody went back their seats and just like, and the kid was big, and the teacher won. Paul's detention. Verse 25, and they bound him with thongs, and Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? I mean, Paul was a quick thinker. I probably couldn't, I can't think fast on my feet, but Paul thought fast on his feet. And, I would have thought about that after I got the beating. What I should have said. Paul's deduction, he deducts that, hey, if worse comes to worse, I'll declare I'm a Roman citizen, which he was. And he knew how to at least make an attempt to get out of this. Verses 26 through 29, when the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. So Paul's deliverance is the next point. And boy, I didn't write this outline in my Bible, but it's a good outline for the chapter. Paul's deliverance. Paul's delivered from that. They forsake the beating of him, and they beat him because they want to, if he's not willing to give us this information, we're going to beat it out of him. And he wanted to know why Paul. By the way, why did that Roman? Why did the centurion? Why wasn't he able to find out? I mean, Paul just gives 21 verses of a speech. Why couldn't the Roman centurion figure out what the problem was? The obvious. He doesn't speak Hebrew. Yeah, he spoke to him in a foreign language, and he couldn't understand it. So he was in the dark before. He's still in the dark, and he doesn't know. So he figures the only way I'm going to get it out of it, we're going to beat it out of him. So Paul's deliverance, they decide, well, we better hold off beating him. And then in verse 30, on the last verse, on the morrow, because he would have known the certainty where he was accused of the Jews, he loosed him. So the idea is that I'm going to take him back to the Jews. He loosed him from the bands and commanded the chief priests and all their council to appear, and brought Paul down and set him before them. And the only D word I could come up for that last verse was Paul's descendants. So he's going to go back to Paul's group of people that are going to understand him, why he's doing this, what had happened, those that understand what the situation is. He's going back there to the family affair, because they're all Hebrews and Jewish. So he's going back to the descendants. Anyway, hey, has anybody ever here done that DNA thing, or that to find out how much of an American Indian you are? That Elizabeth Warren, what a scandal that is. She gets herself, did she get a free ride at Harvard?
Yeah, probably.
She gets a free ride at Harvard, I think, on a lie. On a made-up story. How wicked that is.
No, for her family function.
Yeah, well, still, it's a lie. I know, but still.
You hear all the time, like in the Long Antiques Roadshow, well, this is supposedly is a Civil War, the guy was, and then they look at it and say, well, this is not from a Civil War, it's not.
Yeah, because an expert looks at it.
It wasn't from Bull Run, it's from,
Made in China.
Whatever.
Well, they do. I haven't seen that Antiques Roadshow in years now, but the funny ad is, one of them, I shouldn't say, but for me it's funny, is they're looking at the blanket, and this is very valuable, and they show the people at the house who are watching the TV, and they're holding the same blankets. Remember, I've seen that ad, they're looking at the blanket, they're holding the same one. Anyway, those are the 6 points. Paul's defense, his denouncer's detention, deduction, deliverance, and descendants. Now, I've heard it said that this DNA thing, that pretty soon you won't have to do that. They're going to know everybody's descendants. Because kissing cousins, because we're so closely related, you won't have to get I think I forget what percentage they need. There's a certain percentage they'll be able to tell everybody's descendants without taking the test. Has anybody seen that ad? I don't know how true that is. That you've seen it or heard of that? Now Paul's got this thing on his clicker there. He showed me on his phone that these are not real pictures. That these are computer-generated pictures.
Yeah, the photographs look like people, but they're not.
Now I don't know how true it is, but let's say it is true. That's scary.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
You saw that?
Yeah. People were talking about it, or artificial intelligence, computer generated.
Yeah.
It's fake people.
It's fake people. It looks as real. It looks more real than I am.
It's weird.
Yeah.
It's spooky.
Then they'll give you electronic
Does
DNA.
it look weird? When you said weird, does it look weird?
No, it looks
No, it's
real.
Real people. If you look real closely, it messes up sometimes, like the ear will be messed up or something, but.
It looked real to me. It's just the whole thing, everything. Everything is just gone. I don't know, I got thinking about gun control.
We won't need actors anymore.
And, you know, if you go to the doctor, we don't take our kids to the doctor anymore. I mean, they're adults. Right at the tail end, you take your kids to the doctor, and they want to interview the kid alone. Did we ever let the doctor interview our kid alone? Did we ever do that? Like, doctor, you could just... That bugs me. And what's one of the first questions they ask that kid when they're alone? Do you have guns? And that's none of your business. By the way, is Jesus pro-gun or anti-gun? I don't have guns, folks.
You carried a sword to the garden?
Well, that's where I go. He said, Peter, are you packing? He said, yeah, I got two. I got a 38 and a 45.
I'm packing right here.
He asked if you're... one of my first sermons, I preached on that. The two swords. Peter used the real sword, when he lopped the ear off, and the second sword was the Bible. Oh, the sermon title is The Second Sword. I've never heard anybody ever preach on it, but I preached it. You remember that? You remember the title, The Second Sword. Peter used the ear lopper, and then he used this sword. So, he used, but Jesus, he asked if you're packing. And I haven't really heard anybody give you a lesson on it that I've ever heard. It's weird. Corey came over to the house the other day, and she said the doctor kept asking her. She went to the doctor, she's expecting. Kept asking her this question. She couldn't figure it out. I mean, it's not. I don't go to the doctor. I'm not pregnant, so I don't go to the doctor. And the doctor just kept needling her. He kept asking me this question. And I'm sitting there, to get this test. And I'm sitting there. All of a sudden it dawned on me. I said, well, that doctor wants you to get an abortion. That's what that doctor wants. To find out if you're this high risk so that the decision can be made. That's where this society, this whole thing is going. It just dawned on me what that doctor was really asking, or really encouraging her to go get not that at that point, but to get the test so that when it does happen, if it does happen, the decision. And Corey said, what decision is there to make? There's no decision here to make. It's none of that doctor's business. It's just...
They're making it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And there's people that have not been, and they're not. And they're not these murderers. It's just weird. Pardon?
Two of my sons had that test. And their wives got pregnant. And they told us, no, you should get an abortion. And they looked at the doctor and said, well, you weren't there when the baby was started. You don't have control over the life.
Well, they want control.
I know. That's what my son told me. No, I don't care what the test says. We're not going on it.
Well, the ultimate decision was no test. Forget the test. There's no reason to have the test.
They'll even ask.
It's just on and on this goes, where this is, ties in with what's her name? She's an Indian, and now these pictures, where's all this going to end up? It's going to end up, I hope soon, we're raptured out of here, let them take over. You know,
It's going to be
Jesus
the
asks,
Third Reich times two.
it's just, I'm preaching on that today. What makes a Christian? What makes a Christian? You know, Jesus said, for $1 you can buy 2, and for $2 you can buy 5. $1 buys 2. $2 buys 5. It means Jesus knows a bargain when he sees one, right? But some Christians, that's their whole life. That's their whole life. I mean, Jesus said that. But that doesn't make you break you as a Christian. I mean, lost people know a bargain. I'm against the bargain when everything's got to be a bargain. Well, you tell me that when the food turns blue, black, you got a bargain, all right, but half of it went in garbage. You know, on it goes. It just, what makes a Christian? So we'll preach on that. You know, usually you got plenty of ammo for the week, you know. So we'll load it up. And we'll preach on it this morning. Paul's defense, verses 1 through 21. It always comes down, what does it always come down to? It always comes down to the what? Money. It comes down to the money, folks. It's just piling of godliness. If people looked at the way I spend my money, they'd probably say I'm lost. You know, most Christians, we are lost. Christians don't do that. What do you mean Christians don't do that? On it goes. Paul's defense, verses 1 through 21. It begins in verse 1, and this is not alliterated in this outline. You know, we have to have these subpoints. Not alliterated. It begins with the place. In verse 1, brethren, this defense I make. The place it takes place in verse 40. Paul stood on the stairs of the castle. What do you picture when you see the word castle? You picture turrets, stones, a moat, a drawbridge, chains.
Parapets.
Yeah, say that
Parapets.
Yeah, parapets. Is that the thing you hide behind?
Mhm.
Yeah, the parapet. Huh?
Those slits for the arrows, archers.
Yeah, I think that's what you reference. Yeah, I don't know all those technical terms. Yeah, you picture all that. Is this what this? Well, where did it take place? What city?
Jerusalem.
Do you picture that in Jerusalem? No. So it's not like the castle that you find in Lochlan, Ireland, or you know, Scotland or England. It's termed a castle. In this particular case, we'll get to it. In this particular case, in records that I'm reading, it is the barracks for the Roman soldiers where they're staying. And I would assume it's made out of stones. You know, anything the Romans do. Listen, anything I'm building or anything I'm doing, we're doing it right, folks. Or we're not doing it at all. If it's not right, well, forget it. I'm not involved. You know, count me out. If it's not done the right way. If it's not the right way, I'm out of here. So the Romans, they always did it the right way. It's my kids always. What do my kids say after I'm done building it? What do they say? What does Tammy always say? It's been what? Nailed down and screwed down. It's not budget. It's permanence. You know, if it isn't right, we're not doing it. And by the way, the only reason this is built this way is it wasn't my decision. Whose decision was it? It was the city. First thing I would have done on this, instead of having a 412, I would have made a 6 or an 812 roof. I would have made not an A-frame, but not a pole barn. It looks like you store boats in here. Or, backhoes in here. They wanted to make it look like all the other buildings where they're storing backhoes and bulldozers. I don't know what that was all about. And they said, well, none of the other places are. Well, if you go down here to the Moose Lodge, it's a 612 or an 812. But, if we were going to be here, I had to do what they dictated. All right, so Paul's the place. It's the steps of the castle, verse 40. Verse 34 of the same chapter, Acts 21. Some cried one thing another among the multitude when he could not know the certainty, he carried into the castle. Now I've got like 4 other verses. In verse 35 it says, on the stairs. They were on the stairs of the castle. At chapter 22 and verse 24, all you got to do is just look up the word castle, and it appears the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle. All right, so the place that this is taking place is on the stairs of the castle. What would be prominent about the stairs? I'm sure there's slabs. Slabs of granite, slabs of limestone, slabs of sandstone, slabs, these stairs. What would make that a good place? It's elevated. He's above. In the Bible, that is called, it only appears one time, Nehemiah. It appears. It is called the pulpit. This is not the pulpit. The platform is the elevation. That's what makes the pulpit the pulpit. And so it's elevated, so he could be seen and heard, both. All right? He speaks to them in verse 2 in the Hebrew tongue. He gets the people's attention so they would listen and stay quiet. There were certain things you don't do. I didn't teach. I didn't start out in junior church on day one. When we went to Cleveland Baptist, I made a mistake. I got to teach. It was the one who ran the buses for a while. I can't think of his name. No, not Walden. Before him, or after him. He had a brother. There were two. Searson, Randy Searson. I was in his class. He had a pretty big class. It was like 4th and 5th graders, or 5th and 6th. It was, and he asked me to do a lesson in there, and I think I did Song of Solomon or something. I think the tall high diver was there, the guy that jumped off at SeaWorld into the pond. Don Weeks was there, and I made a mistake. I wanted to get this out of the way. Let's have this over with. I said, anybody? It was like 5 minutes before the class started. Anybody here got to go to the bathroom? Go now. You don't do that with the 6th graders. Anybody here? It was all boys. Anybody here got to go to the bathroom? Go now. That place, if Randy Searson was in the door, he would have been trampled. It was like 100 kids went to the bathroom. He said, "No, you don't say that." I thought I was doing I wanted to get their attention. I got their attention, all right, but to have their attention for the class, and it all worked out. It worked out okay. It wasn't the end of the world. But you want to be able to get their attention and to speak to them in Hebrew. It wasn't like he was clever. I didn't think he would have to think of, how do I get their attention? I'm going to speak to the Jews in the language they understand. Right? That didn't take extra smarts. But, I mean, there is a time when you have to figure you want their attention. How am I going to get their attention? All right, Isaiah 58:1. Don't turn there. What does it say there? And it's specifically when you speak or preach on sin. Isaiah 59 is when a younger person is killed, is that they don't foresee that the Lord takes them out of the way in kindness because of the trouble that could come in their life. So just because a young person dies doesn't mean they were a sinner. and they're damned in God is cutting them mercy. I think that's Isaiah 59. Isaiah 58, verse 1. What was Isaiah how was he to preach? It's a musical instrument. Not like a violin.
Trumpet,
Yes. So he was to do what with his voice?
raise it up.
Yeah, lift up thy voice as a trumpet. So when you're on there, they don't have a, now did they have a megaphone? Not a they have electric megaphones. But if you just take the cone works, that amplifies the voice. Now I would assume they didn't have that. And, by the way, who carries that cone with them in sports? They have a handle on it. We had one on the bus, huh? The cheerleaders do. Cheerleaders carry that. Usually it's not the girls so much as, there's boy cheerleaders. So there's ones flipping the girls. And we're talking more college level. And they're, it's this boom bob and they're hollering and in that megaphone. Is it called a megaphone?
Yeah.
All right, but when you shout, you go like this, right? It more directs it and it kind of amplifies it. So he's on the steps. There's no loudspeaker, so he lifts up his voice like a trumpet. You would assume one would have to lift up their voice in order to be heard, assuming there's a crowd there. I mean, there's probably this feast is going on. There's plenty of people there, and there's no lack of foe. He's got plenty of enemies, so they're all coming out there, and they hope to see a good beating, And they would love to do a nice lynching of Paul. And so in verses 3 through 5, the very first thing that he brings up his past. He wants to win them over. He wants to win them over. And so he says, verily I'm a man which am a Jew. So he goes, a Jew, he is born in Tarsus. He is brought up at the feet of Gamaliel. So how he was taught, where he was taught, and he was zealous. And so I have this list, and you'll have it next week. He brings up his birth, so he brings up his parents. He's Jewish. I mean, he's making, if you're going to speak to a Catholic, if you're going to be a Roman, what is it you say? If you're going to, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Now, short of going against your conscience in saying salvation is other than grace. And Paul would do that, becoming all things to all men. So he brings up the parents, hey guys, I'm Jewish. I'm brought up at Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, at the feet of Gamaliel, so I am well taught. I know all the jots and tittles of the law. Paul's religion, he says he was a Jew, and we'll look up some of this. His attitude, as ye all are this day, as you teach, I teach the same. I teach the same. They got this trailer. They have this trailer on TCN where they show these little clips, like 5-minute clips, 15 or, when the movie's over because they don't fill it in with ads. So then they play this MGM trailer. They did one on a doctor. I would assume it's a real story. I don't know what the doctor's name is. That all these women were losing their babies and dying, and the women were dying, and the death rate was way up. He figured out what was wrong, what was killing these women, and so he corrected the problem in this clinic or hospital. I don't know when I didn't see the beginning, so I don't know when he died, and it went down to almost zero. And he said, but everybody called him a quack. He wrote a book on it. He was a nut. He was a quack. He's a goofball. They laughed him to scorn. He died that way. And then finally they published the book. No one accepted the book. Finally they published it, and then they all did what it said in the book. And then the death rate went way back up again, and it finally came down. What was it that he came up with medically, so that these women would not die?
Washing hands?
Just washing your hands. What's in the Jewish law? Wash under running water. Just wash your hands. All right, that's why the Jews would be hated, like during the Black Plague. Just washing up. So is religion. He's a Jew, as you all are this day. As you're taught, as you teach, I teach. His zeal and persecution. We'll look at this all next week. How zealous he is of the law, how zealous he was before he was saved and all. By the way, who did Paul haul in to kill these Christians? Of Christians, who did he haul in for jailing and killing? Pardon? No, not just one person, but he would go out there and he'd haul them in.
The Jews?
He was into whose rights. You know, today they want whose rights? Women's rights. He wasn't. He hauled men and women in together. He was a real liberator. He wasn't going to cut the women any slack. So he was he believed in equal rights, even back then, right, for men and women alike. When he persecuted Christians, he hauled them in. Notice, and I persecuted this way, verse 4. Go there, verse 4. This way. Acts 9. Go back to Acts 9. Acts 9, verse 2. And desired of him letters to Damascus, in verse 2. 9, verse 2. To the synagogues, that if we found any of this way, the way that these Christians are going. What did Jesus say of himself, John 14?
I'm the way, the truth.
I am the way. All right? Back 30 years ago, what did they call themselves? The one way, I think. And they would hold up one finger. One way. One way. I didn't know. But back then, 35 years ago, I didn't know what that meant. Somebody would have to explain that to me. The way. So he was persecuting those that were of that way. That way. All right. Then he does his past. Then Paul in verse 6, and it came to pass that as I made my journey, I did this the other day when I don't know if it was preaching yet, and it came to pass. I think I said that was the 2,000 years when Jesus was gone. He returns. Yeah, that's at the Maniac at Gadara. That as I made my journey and was come nigh unto Damascus about noon. So he describes his past before he's saved. Now Paul is now describing his present condition. I am now a Christian. This is what happened to me. He is now giving his testimony. And he gives his testimony 3 times in the Bible. Acts 9, 3 times it's told. Acts 9, Acts 22, and Acts 26. And this is what he does. He gives the place, the time, the light he sees, the voice he hears, the word he calls him by name, the Lord, and the request that is made, and so on, his temporary blindness. He describes his present condition. He describes in verses 12 to 13 of the same chapter, Acts 22, the Lord's helper here, Ananias. He says, a devout man according to the law, a good report of all the Jews. So he's still making these connections. His helper was a Jew. Going back to the Roman Catholics. All right, when you're dealing, always remember this, when you're dealing with somebody, make as many bridges as you can. Always make as many bridges as you can. Whenever you can, where you're not compromising. So what could we say about Mary, the Virgin Mary? Make a connection with the Virgin Mary. She's the Mother of Christ. She's the one that gave birth. That Mary was a virgin. Was she a perpetual virgin? No. See, then you start to break fellowship over that. Then you can have a disagreement. How would you, by the way, with what you gave me today, how would you deal with them? By chapter and verse. You find the place where he is the son of the carpenter, and they list the kids. And they list the kids. His brothers and sisters, his half-brothers and sisters. And so he deals with them in his present condition. And then he, in verse 17, Acts 22, and here again, and it came to pass that when I was come again to Jerusalem, and talking about Paul's plans, his return, his warning, and we'll look at all this because you'll have notes here before you, and then his desire, and when he said, "Depart from me, I will send thee hence unto the Gentiles." This is Paul's desire. When God's will becomes our will, is. By the way, what is what's the word that sets him off there in verse 21? Man, there are some key words that it's like lighting a match. So what do they say in verse 21 that just sets the firecracker over? The word Gentiles. I mean, that just blows the lid right off a thing. Huh? Yeah, they would be considered dogs. But you see, in our climate, in our culture today here in America, there are buzzwords that just set people. They just go south, man. They set off. You know, you say the wrong word, people just can't handle it. Give me a word that would set people off.
N-word.
The N-word. Oh, people would get set off with that. They call themselves that, by the way. We're down in there, not lately. And I mean, they do it. You say, it's a term of endearment. I mean, I don't know what you're on, but they're doing it for real down there. All right? Give me another one that sets people off. MAGA. Jesus would. The MAGA hat. You know, in our culture today, you say Robert E. Lee. I mean, they might swallow their teeth. You say that, the MAGA hat. You say Donald Trump. They are going to grind their teeth. The women's place is in the home. If they weren't facing you, by the time they turned around and faced you, they're going to need to see a chiropractor, man. You know what? There's buzzwords. Now, if you read these accounts, they'll list off all the buzzwords. One particular preacher, he lists himself in there. If you say the word what? Say it out loud, sister. You say Ruckman, that'll send 90% of Baptists into the hospital. They'll have a problem with their sacroiliac when that's said. And on it goes. There's all these buzzwords, especially today, the MAGA hat. They just had somebody pull a gun on somebody down in Tennessee. Was that Tennessee or Kentucky or in Kentucky? They pulled a gun on him because he was wearing a MAGA hat. I told the wife, have you ever seen a MAGA hat for sale? I said, well, I feel like picking up a couple. Just to have it, just in case I need one, you know? Huh? Well, the red hat that says "Make America Great."
You know, like
Again.
the Trump campaign.
It was the Trump campaign, like a Trump button. You had "Make MAGA." Yeah, give me one. Where do they sell them? I've never seen them.
They were part of the Trump campaign. You could only get them by donating or buying them from the Trump campaign.
Oh, well, the first word that just cut me out. The donation. I don't know. But I wouldn't mind having that. But yeah, that's, people are just nuts. Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
They just had a thing in the news yesterday or the day before, they were talking about statue of McKinley in California. They want to remove it because the American Indians over there complaining about what he did. And McKinley was president just before Teddy Roosevelt, about 1900. He's the one who was assassinated.
Right.
Well,
Was he from Cleveland or?
They want to take the
Canton.
statue out of California and bring it to Canton. Because he's in a...
McKinley was from Canton, Garfield's from up there.
Garfield's this way.
Yeah,
He was a
Garfield's
preacher,
north.
by the way, Garfield,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
McKinley's Canton.
Mhm.
Okay, and he was assassinated?
Yeah, that was the one that was shot. Somebody wrapped their arm up with a gun in it and they came up to shake his
An
hand.
anarchist shot him up in Buffalo. He was opening a World's Fair up there.
And what happened? Did the doctor make a boo-boo?
No, he was shot. Garfield was the one that malingered forever. They led him and said,
Oh,
he's
he got shot too?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's where the doctors spoofed up. But McKinley was just flat out, he's dead.
Garfield could have been taken care of with
What-
modern medicine in 2 weeks.
Well, that's the buzzword, folks, back then. You say Gentiles to a Jew, that's it. You're on the blacklist. We won't hear you from here to doomsday. You know, and that's what keyed them off. All right, we're 5 minutes to the hour. Father, bless now the preaching and following. In Christ's name, amen. Preaching at 15.